Before the video begins, make sure you're subscribed to see more natural history content like this. Hit the bell icon to keep yourself in the loop, and leave a comment if you feel like it. A brand new design is up on the Edge Redbubble. This time, I've got grizzly werewolf stickers and shirts brought to you by the talent of Ramos. Go check out the Redbubble with links in the description and comment section below. Werewolves are one of the big icons of Spoopy Month. Along with the likes of blood-sucking vampires, sandpaper mummies, swamp monsters, and stitched-together Etsy corpses are the shaggy-coated, bloodthirsty transformers of the canid variety. Easily one of the most frightening for their unthinking, bestial nature and tendency to just go ham on just about any living thing, werewolves have a fascinating history that blends together fact, fiction, misconception, luscious prose, instinctual fear, myth, religion, and murder to produce one of the most common modern analogues to human nature. Werewolves in modern pop culture vary dramatically in their appearance. The older varieties, like Wolfman, are simply just people with vaguely wolf-like features. They're much more humanoid than they are canid. Then you got the really uncreative ones that are just wolves. These are the shapeshifters, the kind of stuff you see in Twilight. And then you got my personal favorite variety, the in-betweeners, those that look like transitional forms between man and wolf. These are the kind of critters you see in Harry Potter, Underworld, Dog Soldiers, American Werewolf in London, and more. Tracking the history of the werewolf through human culture is tricky because they appear in many different cultures. There are also other types of shape-shifting mythical creatures and figures in all sorts of cultures. Many are wolfish, but many are also based on beasts endemic to the areas of those various cultures that constructed them. Were-tigers, jaguars, and people who shapeshift into all manners of critters pepper our various histories. Are they to be lumped into the werewolf phenomena? I don't think so, at least not for this video. The various shapeshifter myths have different backstories and may provide different lessons to those who believe them. For this video, I'm going to discuss the wolfish werewolf as the Europeans know them. Ancient history. The various European werewolf myths have a common ancestor originating in the Middle Ages, or medieval period, the 5th to late 15th centuries. They arose as Christianity started taking its stranglehold on this part of the world. In so doing, people had to interpret pre-Christian myths into their narrow Christian terms. The underlying origin of the werewolf, the ideas of shapeshifting, can be further traced back to Proto-Indo-European mythology, anywhere from 5500 to 4000 BCE. In these proto-werewolf mythologies, lycanthropy is considered part of the warrior class, an initiation ritual. There were many pagan cults associated with transformations of men into wolves. Of course, the Christian-centric perspective of the medieval period saw this as devil worship. The Western and Northern European concept of the werewolf is based most heavily on the use of the wolf in the Germanic flavor of paganism. Since the idea of beastly transformations and showing one's true nature is a human thing, the werewolf has culturally convergently evolved from different cultures throughout Europe, independently of the Germanic tradition. There were many tales of werewolves in ancient Greece and classical antiquity. They mostly centered around curses placed on people who dared to conduct human sacrifices or other sinful acts. One source of werewolves seems to originate from Mount Lycaon and the archaic festivals which took place there, according to the stories. The rite of passages which occurred at this location involved the threat of cannibalism and the possibility of werewolf transformation in adolescence. The patron god of the festival was Zeus, referred to as Lycaos. One of the more well-known stories was that of King Lycaon of Arcadia, as recounted by Greek geographer Pausanias in the 2nd century BC. King Lycaon was transformed into a wolf by Zeus after sacrificing a child to him on Mount Lycaon. He somehow thought that was gonna be a good idea. In a derivation of the story by Roman poet Ovid, Lycaon sacrifices a hostage to serve their entrails to Zeus to test if he's a real god, resulting in the wolf curse. According to the Greek geographer Pausanias, the sacrifices were not one-off events. Supposedly, they continued up till the 2nd century BC. Another type of werewolf was recounted by Pliny the Elder. In the region of Arcadia, the Anthus clan would send out a guy to go through another rite of passage. He had to go to a marsh, hang his clothes on an oak tree, and swim across the swamp. After that, he became a wolf and had to join a pack of the smelly babies for a whole 9 years. If he refrained from eating human bits, he'd return to being a human. But if he actually, acted like a wolf, he'd be stuck one forever. This 9-year trial and the choice of giving into instinct or remaining human was brought up by Pausanias as well, so it seems like its own sect of werewolf. Middle Ages. There is a ton of evidence that the belief in werewolves was widespread and sincere throughout medieval Europe. They were mentioned in medieval law codes in England. There were rumors of Bulgarian royalty using magic to transform into a wolf. Werewolves also crop up many times in works written by churchmen throughout the medieval period. Gervase of Tilbury, an English canon lawyer, statesman, and cleric of the medieval period, even just plainly stated that belief in werewolves was widespread throughout Europe. Plenty of theological works brought up werewolves and even condemned reading stories about them if they lost their reasoning and went totally ham slaughtering people. Many religious leaders, such as Augustine of Hippo, or people claiming themselves as Augustine, thought that the beliefs of werewolves were dumb and cringe as only God had the power to transform a critter. From here, the trail of werewolves grew colder, as much of the beliefs in werewolves was successfully suppressed by Christian oppression throughout much of Europe. Many probably survived outside Christianity's sphere of influence, but those that practiced likely didn't have books or weren't literate enough to write about their beliefs, at least until someone finds proof that they did. The werewolf still pops up every now and again in literature throughout the rest of the medieval period, just not as heavily as before. Those pagan traditions that included werewolves continued to persist longest in Scandinavian countries during the Viking Age of the Middle Ages. There were tales of warriors clad in wolf skins, imbibed with their brutal animal spirit of their pelts to ravage the battlefield without fear of pain, extremely similar to the Viking berserkers. Early modern history. From here, werewolves would become akin to witches. Belief in and fear of werewolves would grow alongside and become influenced by a similar belief and fear of witches. In 16th century France, many court trials of suspected werewolves were conducted after reports of attacks. Most, if not all, cases were inconclusive when it came to the wolf part, but did provide clear evidence of murder and cannibalism. Yep, there were murderers who decided to take a chunk out of their victims, and were rightfully dubbed werewolves. Like Gilles Garner, a French serial killer and cannibal who did some heinous acts in 1573. Witch trials saw their earliest appearances in the first half of the 15th century, the Valais witch trials being a prime example. With witches were then lumped werewolves. Then, in the early 17th century, attention was drawn to werewolves again because of those darn witches. As part of the European witch hunts, King James I of England prosecuted witchcraft during this time, but I feel like he provided an oddly prescient yet still stigmatic view on lycanthropy. He regarded werewolves as victims of delusion induced by a natural superabundance of melancholic. Sounds a lot like the 17th century's idea of depression. Now, I'm not saying that they were right, nor that depression could bring on delusion of being a werewolf, but I find it interesting someone was thinking of these supernatural beings as merely figments or ailments of the mind, despite the lack of understanding in psychology. This disorder of the brain explanation would continue after the early 17th century, and sort of started killing off the belief in the big hairy beasts as real flesh and blood threats. Reports would of course continue of huge hairy beasts, but those won't ever stop as long as we exist and so long as big hairy beasts exist. One such beast was the Beast of GEVAUDAN. Beast of GEVAUDAN. The Beast of GEVAUDAN is a creature blamed for the deaths of 80 people from 1764 to 1767 in southeastern France. It was said to be an enormous wolf-like beast with reddish fur and black stripes, a large head with a long snout, short pointy ears, and either a long or short tail. A military and volunteer brigade were unsuccessful in finding the creature responsible, but were more than happy to kill some wolves and a hyena that they found. The pelt of said hyena did exist as late as 1819, so it proves there was a hyena involved. Besides that, no real physical proof of a single creature was found, nor currently exists, and is more likely to be an amalgam of many different animals. Though not necessarily a werewolf, it was lumped into the hysteria of werewolves and wolf-like beasts at the time. Modern werewolves. The fear of werewolves would continue past the 17th century, most strongly in the Holy Roman Empire until its dissolution in 1806. Many more literary works would be written between the 17th and 20th centuries about werewolves, and even as late as 1853 there were people blaming lycanthropy for their murderous acts. Spain's first recorded serial killer, Manuel Blanco Romasanta, was judged and condemned for 13 murders, but he said he wasn't guilty as he had a condition which turned him into a wolf. It seems like a lot of werewolf attacks are more likely to be those of ordinary wolves. Until the 20th century, wolf attacks were an occasional but widespread part of living in Europe. The wolves of Europe were much more aggressive than those of North America, as they lived with humans longer and were forced into smaller territories, plus there were a lot more people that continued to encroach on wolf territory during this period. It seems that it was inevitable that wolves would be the ones caught up in the gravity of folklore as devilish shapeshifters. This is corroborated by other were-creatures of cultures from around the world. They make their most feared natural predators into shape-shifting monsters. There are were-hyenas in some African cultures, were-tigers in India, were-tigers or leopards in Asia, and were-pumas and jaguars in southern South America. So, what the hell is lycanthropy supposed to be? Is there any kernel of truth to it? Can it be explained as misconceptions of real phenomena? If you've been enjoying this video, give it a like and make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon for updates on new content. Lycanthropy. In a similar manner to how cryptozoologists speculate a real, more plausible animal as the culprits of reported cryptids, some modern researchers and historians have looked towards a real phenomenon that may have been projected into the folklore of what a werewolf is. There are many things that could easily be misunderstood as werewolves. HYPERTRICHOSIS is a genetic mutation which causes excessive hair growth. It is possible to occur in any animal with hair and has been observed in cats, horses, and apes, including us. The condition can occur from birth, congenitally, or can be acquired later in life. The excessive hair can occur in specific locations on the body or all over. Humans with this condition have often found themselves part of circus acts throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, but it would have occurred throughout human history. Some researchers have used hypertrichosis as a possible origin for some or all werewolf myths. It would make sense since these folks could look quite wolfish or beastly to those that are unfamiliar with the condition. Many other historians have discounted this explanation because the condition is too rare to have started a myth as widespread and diverse as werewolves. Congenital porphyria is another medical condition looked to as a possible logical explanation for the origin of werewolves. Porphyria is a group of liver disorders that see a buildup of porphyrins in the body. This has a negative effect on the nervous system, with rapid, short attacks of abdominal and chest pain, vomiting, confusion, constipation, fever, high blood pressure, and high heart rate. The condition may also result in photosensitivity, reddish teeth, and psychosis. All of this might come off as beastly behavior and appearance to the ignorant. However, this condition may be ruled out as a possible werewolf origin because almost all werewolf myths plainly describe the werewolf as a true wolf. The vast majority were people that transformed into wolves but didn't have a beastly human form. On top of that, in almost all myths, the human form of the werewolf was inconspicuous. They were never obvious like the symptoms of porphyria are. So, what are the characteristics of the werewolf, and how did people transform into them? Werewolf biology. I've discussed a little bit about this topic when bringing up specific werewolf history. It kinda goes along with the territory of retelling the reports, literature, and myths of the beasts. It should be pretty obvious by now that werewolf is an incredibly broad term applied to an incredibly broad number of mythical beasts. They're all grouped together as a person which becomes a wolf. That's about it, but of course there's more than meets the eye. The transformation may have been permanent or temporary. The were-creature would be the man himself transformed, or it could have been a double who transforms the man but leaves his human body unchanged. The wolf may be the man's soul, which leaves his body to go on a killing spree while the human body was left in a trance back at home, and many more. Some cultures believed that the werewolf could be told apart from others while in their human form. Those telltale signs being stuff like unibrows, curved fingernails, low-set ears, and a swinging stride. How would you be able to definitively prove that the person is a werewolf though? Well, some believed all you had to do was cut someone. If they were a werewolf, you'd find hair bursting from the wound. The Russians thought a werewolf would have bristles underneath their human tongue. In almost all myths, the beast looked indistinguishable from a wolf, save for some very specific things. They would commonly have no tail, be a bit larger in size than your average wolf, and had human eyes and voices. How would you become a werewolf? Like before, some of this was told through the original myths, but there are so many stories and myths that I couldn't possibly retell them all. How to become a werewolf. One of the easiest ways to become a werewolf was to remove all your clothes and slap on a belt of wolfskin. The next one up was assuming the entire wolfskin. Some stories said you could get down with the sickness by rubbing yourself down with a magic salve. Yummy. You could just drink some definitely not contaminated rainwater out of the definitely safe for consumption footprint of the animal. One of the funnest ways was to down a cup of special beer and repeating a special incantation. Wouldn't you want to become a werewolf by drinking special beer? I know I would. Another rather easy one comes from Italy, France, and Germany. All you had to do was sleep outside on a summer night with the full moon shining directly on your face only on a certain Wednesday or Friday. Fun stuff. The most malicious one was a pact with the devil, because you can't have Christianity without fear of the unknown. These satanic allegiances were always done with the worst of intentions by the vilest of humanity. How else would they be able to satiate their craving for human flesh? Apparently, these guys were sorcerers. They smudged some gross ointment all over themselves and put on an enchanted girdle. The girdle made them feel like they became wolves in shape and nature. From there, they went around acting like wolves. Now that you've become a werewolf, how would you rid yourself of the curse? How to reverse the curse. With various werewolf myths and various procedures to turn yourself, voluntarily or involuntarily, into one. There are a bunch of remedies to reverse the curse. The ancient Greeks and Romans figured they just had to wear out the victim to exhaustion, and they'd no longer be able to transform into a wolf. This probably stems from their idea that becoming a wolf leaves the human form debilitated and exhausted. Iron Man for charity? No. Do an Iron Man to become human again. Medieval Europeans had 3 ways. You could stuff the victim full of the Colonel's 11 herbs and spices, nip and tuck the victim, or go all exorcist on them. In less comical words, you could give the victim medicines, usually the highly toxic wolfsbane. You could perform surgery on the victim, or exorcise the victim. Not the ancient Greek exorcise routine, but the Christian exorcism of nasty spirits allowed to do evil by God. I don't think it's any coincidence that many of these cures ended up killing the victim. How else would you be able to use their suffering to reinforce your beliefs, right? Empathy, what's that? Moving on from religiously affiliated European barbarism, we come to the Arabic-originated Sicilian belief of curing a werewolf by striking it on the forehead with a knife. Not sure if all the myths say the butt of the knife, or the blade, or the point, but I'm going to assume they meant the pointy end. I mean, it certainly is a good way to get rid of your werewolf problem. Another fun remedy, was to run nails through the hands of the victim. Aside from some possible tetanus, you'll rid the poor SOB of their werewolfitis. Some areas of Germany had a more pleasant ritual to kill the werewolf. All you had to do was Beetlejuice the guy in saying their Christian name 3 times, and then poof, no more werewolf. The Danish thought all you had to do was scold the werewolf back into its human form. What happens if you kill a werewolf but don't go all the way by destroying its remains? Revenants. The Greeks thought the werewolf might become a wolf or hyena that prowled battlefields to consume the wounded, dying, and dead. A similar belief was shared by folks in Germany, Poland, and northern France. They thought that people who died in mortal sin, as slippery as that term is, would come back to life as blood-drinking wolves. Like the werewolf, they would return to their human form in a day, but unlike the werewolf, their human form remained dead as a doornail. How would you even deal with such a supernatural horror? The same way you dealt with anything back then. You cut its damn head off and got a priest to speak some gibberish over it. Then you also had to take the head and chuck it into a stream or body of moving water. How quaint. Werewolves in fiction. Everyone knows that werewolves are anthropomorphic wolf beasts transformed through the light of the moon or the bite of another wolf who are vulnerable to silver and resistant to injuries which would kill a normal human, right? Well, that's all attributes made up by modern werewolf fiction. Original werewolf myths simply had people turning into wolves. The first anthropomorphic beast appears in the 1935 film Werewolf of London. This version was a lot more anthropomorphic than what is seen later, mostly because of the actor Henry Hull not wanting to spend long hours in the makeup chair. The beast basically looks like an even more unkempt Wolverine with some long nasty twofers, pointed ears, widow's peak, bushy brows, and canine nose. The silver bullet thing possibly originates in the story of the beast of GEVAUDAN, as it was reportedly shot by a silver bullet. However, this detail was added in by later writers who retold the story, and it entered the public's subconscious only to reappear in more traditional werewolf stories. Some English folklore did mention a vulnerability to silver, but not specifically silver bullets, nor was it that widespread of a belief and more of a literary flourish. The creature that started the werewolf craze and implanted what a werewolf ought to look like into pop culture was Lon Chaney Jr.'s interpretation in 1941's The Wolfman. This guy was basically just a dude in hairy makeup. He was a lot furrier than the 1935 interpretation of the creature, with some cool beastly feet prosthetics, pointed ears, teeth add-ons, and a dog-like schnoz. I think it's a cool but kinda silly detail that they made the actor walk on their tiptoes as the werewolf to give off a digitigrade look, but it kinda just ends up looking like a guy tiptoeing around. Too bad digilegs or something like them had yet to be invented. The horrifying, bone-splitting, skin-stretching, agonizing transformation of human to wolf wouldn't become mainstream until 1981's An American Werewolf in London and The Howling. In these films, the human body is physically transformed, unsupernaturally, into that of an anthropomorphic werewolf. The anthropomorphic werewolf was popularized during this time, and would subsequently become as popular and well known as the more humanoid wolfman-type werewolf, while the original wolf form werewolf would become obscure. They rarely show up in movies nowadays, with the biggest exception being the Twilight series, but we don't talk about that travesty around these parts. So, what have we learned? The history of the mythical creature known as the werewolf is extremely old. They originated in ancient Greece and Rome and have captivated the fear of our species ever since. They come in all shapes and sizes, originate in all manner of superstitions, supernatural oogie boogies, and satanic worship. They've come quite a ways since the simple big bad wolf archetype of old to become a truly grisly sight of anthropoid structure. I'm sure they'll continue to frighten us for centuries to come. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, hit the bell icon for updates, like this video, and drop a comment in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my elephant tier patrons, Thea Svensson, Staniforth Hopkins, Dinosaur, and Arda Bayer, as well as my Tyrannosaurus tier patrons, Henry Brennan, Danny Van Heck, Dana Manchester, Chris Frampton, and Admin.